We're now going to turn to Alex Newman for our next story. Alex, this is an alarming story in many respects. It's a homeschool summit. It's called Problems, Politics, and Prospects for Reform that is going to be held at Harvard University, according to the law school. The Harvard University Law School is going to host this June 18th and 19th. And the entire premise of this symposium is that government owns kids, not families, and that we've got to reform, if not eliminate, homeschooling opportunities for moms and dads across the country.
Yeah, that's exactly it, Duke. It's a so-called summit designed openly to wage war on educational liberty, homeschooling, and parental rights. The two key organizers, you have Professor Elizabeth Bartholet of Harvard University, the founder of the Child Advocacy Program, and she argued even recently in a law review journal that there ought to be a presumptive ban on homeschooling, and that anybody who was allowed to homeschool, then the parents would have to prove to the government that that would be okay. So complete reversal of the way we do things now. The other main organizer, Professor Dwyer out of William and Mary Law School, he says that parental rights are in our imaginations. There are no such thing as parental rights. He says the parent-child relationship only exists because the state confers maternity and paternity on parents through the laws. So this is the mindset that these people are coming from, and they're trying to move the Overton window, right? So on the one hand, you have the ban homeschooling outright, and then the more moderate people are the ones who say we just need much, much heavier regulation of homeschooling. Nowhere do we have people who say, hey, actually, parents are the ones who ought to be overseeing of the education of their children, and that should be the norm. It's a very, very scary attack, Duke, on fundamental, God-given, protected human rights.
What we know, and we saw this with the gay marriage agenda, we saw this with the LGBT agenda broadly, more broadly we're seeing it now with the transgender agenda, is that they demand everything knowing they won't get it. And then the compromise is to, we won't today, right now, ban it altogether. We're just going to radically reform it and subject it to major government oversight. So 2 years from now, when all those laws and legislation's in place, then you move to get rid of it altogether. This is the plan from progressives about 150 years now. We've seen this from them. And what really gets me, Alex, is this idea that we're doing this on behalf of the children. We're advocating for children. What is their argument? Not parents. Parents don't have rights, as you just said. But we want to make sure that every American school kid gets a public school education. If you're not giving your kid a public school education, say these educrats, you are depriving them of an actual education. And how many times have you and I sat here and discussed the failed public schools? Explain to me, Alex, how they can, in good faith, make the argument. We see how we're failing our public school kids. Most of them can't read at grade level. We got 2 and 3 years behind on the NAEP scores where they should be in English, reading, and math. The schools are a complete travesty of radical sexual education and politics, lack of oversight. It's just a complete mess. In what world can they argue that the students, if they're not getting this crappy public school education, are actually suffering?
It really requires them to twist themselves into pretzels. It's actually quite interesting to see because the data is very clear. Homeschoolers do, on average, far better than the victims of the government schools. I mean, on average, they're scoring 15, 30, 40 percentile points higher than the victims of the government schools on the government's own academic achievement tests. They do better on every trackable metric that we have for socialization. They do better as adults. They get better jobs. They start more companies. They do less drugs. Their marriages last longer. I mean, on every front, homeschoolers do better than the victims of government school. But what's really troubling to me, Duke, is I've seen all this before. I was living in Scandinavia in 2012 when the Swedish government decided to ban home education. That's also, by the way, when they decided that all so-called private schools had to teach the government's curriculum. And they were using the exact same language that we are seeing now from these totalitarians at Harvard. This Elizabeth Bartholet, one of the organizers at Harvard Law School, she's contrasting homeschooling absolutism, as she puts it, versus the children's right to an education. Well, guess what? This is exactly the same language that the Swedish government used. So I wrote articles in probably a dozen publications around the world. They were read on Fox News about what happened in Sweden. And when I called the education ministry over and over and over again, the response I got was that children have a right to an education. And what they mean is the children have a right to be brainwashed by the government. Mm-hmm. They don't have a right to get a proper education from their parents at home. So it's a complete reversal of reality. Even the United Nations actually recognize that parents have a prior right to choose the kind of education that should be provided to their children. But now we're entering a new era. They know that homeschoolers make the government schools look terrible, because here we are, we're providing our children with an amazing education. We do it for, on average, like $500 a year, and the kids are beating the pants off the victims of government schools. They've got to shut it down because it exposes the fraud that is the government school system, and that's why they're in a panic. That's why they're going this route.
Well, and the one thing we didn't answer, it was kind of a rhetorical question, wasn't it, Alex? Because we recognize that it's not math and science and reading and literacy and history that we're talking about here. If those were still the standards by which the public schools operated, giving your kids an actual academic education, there would be no argument. Hands down, this is stupid. Homeschool wins. But you and I both know, and anybody who watches this show knows, that what the educrats are talking about is homeschool parents aren't teaching their kids that transgenderism is a thing. They're not getting 3-year-olds to question their own gender. They're not replacing traditional male and female pronouns with all these goofy new invented pronouns. They are not turning out little Greta Thunbergs. Take a look at speaking of Sweden, right? What little Greta became under Swedish educational policy, right? Little activists. They are not advancing Planned Parenthood homeschool parents or the LGBTQ agenda and their homeschooling. They're not telling kids everything's relative. They're giving kids an education based in factual academic subjects, not all of this left-wing globalism. And that's what Bartlett and that's what Harvard's doing. We own your kids. They don't belong to you. They are citizens of the world. Our job in public schools is to brainwash and reformulate your kids along the line of globalists. It has nothing to do with anything else. If you understand that, then you understand what they're doing.
Yeah, you're so right, Duke. That's exactly what's going on here. And, we need to fight this with every fiber of our being. I mean, they are now coming for the most sacred, the most fundamental rights that a human being can have, the relationship, the bond between a parent and a child. This is where we need to draw the line and say, absolutely not. You've already got 85% of the children that you're destroying. We will not let you go one step further. We've got to stand up against this. Harvard won't allow anybody to come in. It's an invitation only, so we're not even allowed to come in and report on it. But this is the agenda that they are setting, that they are pushing. We need to be aware, and we need the homeschool community and even non-homeschoolers to recognize that our rights are at risk. We have got to stand firm.
Harvard University deserves a lot of blame here, Harvard Law School, for hosting a conference whose primary aim is the same aim that the Nazis had in World War II when they banned homeschooling, to form citizens that were conforming to the state, young citizens that would betray their parents, young citizens who weren't getting a serious education in academic subjects but were being groomed to become the new Nazis, the new soldiers on behalf of the Reich. This is exactly what Harvard's hosting, something moving in exactly that direction. And we've got to ask the question, why would Harvard host such a one-sided conference? There is no pretense, no pretending, no inviting of people from the other side. This is a how do we ultimately find a way to phase out homeschooling? Hey everyone, and thanks for watching. If you want to get your kids out of these ridiculous public schools, consider Freedom Project Academy's Judeo-Christian online school for students in K through 12. Enrolling March through July. Request your free information packet at freedomforschool.com. That's freedomforschool.com.